Morning, ma'am.
Morning.
Good morning, ma'am.
Okay.
Good morning, ma'am.
So welcome to day 3. Anything arisen over the adjournment? Nope.
Not from the council, ma'am.
Okay. I can't find in the library. I don't know. Well, I couldn't yesterday evening. Any inquiry documents that are handed up during the inquiry? I think they're prefaced with ID2.
Right.
So haven't got the opening statements on there. Haven't got the letters that were submitted.
I know that they have been sent kindly electronically by the council to CMS, who are instructing me. I'm told that they're being uploaded at the moment, so hopefully during the course of the morning that should come into being.
Okay, thank you. And then I think there was an email last night about landscape, a landscape document, technical document. I think it was your witness, Mr.
Yes.
Warren.
Yes, that's right. It's actually for it's not for my witness. It's for when Mr. Spence gives his evidence.
And it was referenced in the AVR visualizations.
It is exactly. Yeah. As you know, we're not calling AVR, but when we ask Mr. Spence questions, obviously that's formed part of the general kind of background. So it's important that you have it.
Okay, and then the slides that Mr. Patel spoke to in his evidence in chief, are they going on as a document as well?
Yes, we can do that. We can certainly do that, ma'am. Yes. I don't think we'd intended to before, but we will do that.
Thank you. Okay. If there's nothing else, then would you like to call your next witness?
Thank you very much, ma'am. I think we briefly saw Mr. Adams. There he is. Yeah. Morning, Mr. Adams.
Welcome.
You're muted, Mr. Adams, so let's be hearing you as well as seeing you.
That's not the best of starts.
That's right.
Everybody, good morning, ma'am.
Morning.
Good morning. So same approach, ma'am, with Mr. Adams as with Mr. Patel yesterday. I'm going to introduce him, and then we have a similar number, I think, Mr. Adams, of slides from the evidence to guide the way through the evidence in chief, just like yesterday, if that's acceptable. Yep. And Mr. Adams's colleague, I think, has got the screen sharing ability, and we'll put those up. Okay, thank you. Could we just take those off for the moment, just while we introduce Mr. Adams, and then come back to the slides in just a second? Is that all right? Thank you very much. Okay. If you're happy, ma'am, we'll start.
Yep.
Thank you. Mr. Adams, your name is Marcus Adams, is that right?
That's correct.
And you're an architect, a member of the Royal Institute of British Architects, and you are managing partner of JTP, is that correct?
That's correct.
You tell us in your evidence about your academic and your professional background, qualifications and experience, and you also tell us about 2 things in particular that I wanted to touch on. Here I'm looking at 1.1.5 and 1.1.6 of your proof. You needn't have them open, Mr. Adams, but okay. The first of those talks about your in particular personal involvement in the design code methodology and approach that JTP often uses. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, I've been leading that within our practice to deliver new places. Yeah.
And obviously, in relation to the Tesco scheme in outline with the code, that's of some relevance. And the second is the following paragraph 116 indicates what your involvement has been personally in the Tesco scheme. So from the outset through managing the general overview of the project process as managing partner. Is that right?
That's correct.
Great. Okay. So I'm sorry to have stopped the screen sharing. Can we start that now? And if you remember what we did yesterday, Mr. Adams with Mr. Patel, I'm quite happy for you to say next slide. I might chip in every now and then just with an additional point, but otherwise, let's do the slides in order.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. If I can have next slide, please. Okay, as been set out in the introductions, the Tesco site is an outline planning application. It's been accompanied by a design code, all future matters reserved for future future applications. You can see the Osterley Place or the Tesco site to the left of the slide, and Scion Gardens or the Homebase site to the right hand side, which Mr. Patel gave evidence on yesterday, and the Grade 2 Gillette building that sits between the two off the Great West Road. I think obviously the premise of this project is the relocation of the Tesco store from its current site to a new one fronting the main Great West Road. It enables the reuse of an underutilised brownfield site for the creation of a new neighbourhood. The new neighbourhood is design-led, landscape-led. The outline planning application and its parameter plans and the design code set out a framework of streets and spaces, creating a high-quality place to live, and as I'll explain later, providing a local heart and a local hub for the community, providing a range of different mixed uses as part of this new neighbourhood. Okay, next slide, please. Sorry, that's not the next slide. That's the next slide. Thank you. I think it's in this slide, I think, where you can see the Homebase site outlined in blue and the Tesco site outlined in red. You can see its location. Rightly so, there's been much emphasis given to the roles, to its relationship to Osterley Park in the northwest, and to Scion Park and Kew Gardens in the northwest, and Scion Park and Kew Gardens in the southeast. But what you will also see very clearly is the role of the Great West Corridor, the real stark transformation from the finer grain homes to the west to the larger footprint buildings of the Great West Corridor to the north and the northeast. And that includes the Sky Campus, a significant area immediately to the north of the site, with over 7,500 employees. And then the Boulder Academy, a recently opened school, again immediately to the north of the site. As we'll hear later, that area or the Great West Road is part of the Great West Corridor Master Plan, an opportunity area providing 7,500 new homes in this area and 14,000 new jobs. And the Tesco site was identified as a tall building cluster within that emerging policy. So I think that gives us a sort of overview of the location, certainly at its wider context, and especially its relationship to those heritage assets. Next slide. If I could ask my colleagues in the next room to slightly turn down the volume, please, that I can hear them coming back through the wall, which I thought was better insulated than this. Thank you. Right, next slide. I think this for me summarises the when we talk about context. The Church Commissioners' land to the west, the 1930s suburban Piccadilly line driven extension of London, with its very characteristic 2-bedroom, lower density, detached, semi-detached homes each side of the Great West Road. And then, to the east is the start of the Golden Mile, the Great West Corridor, where from that aerial photograph you saw a complete transformation in building footprint, in building use. And obviously in the 1920s and 1930s, the Golden Mile was made of a very bold, future-looking architecture of Art Deco buildings designed and provided to accommodate the industrial uses and brands of that era. And obviously now many of those have been demolished. The area buildings have been replaced by poorer quality buildings, and that commercial area is undergoing a transformation as part of that Great West Corridor study area to reinvent itself, to be a bold proposition for something for the 21st century, providing homes and jobs. But I think, as you see on this slide, Scion Lane running northwest to southeast very much clearly provides that definition and distinct break in the character between those two areas. Next slide, please. Okay. You know, in terms of our analysis, our starting point in understanding the heritage context was absolutely key. We have those local assets in terms of the Gillette building and others, which we heard about yesterday, that sit in quite close proximity to the Tesco site. And then we also have that wider heritage context, particularly in the relationship to Tesco site of Osterley Park to the northwest and Syon Park to the southeast, as you see on this slide. Next one, please. Then, as we zoom in, particular focus on is the four edges of the Tesco site. What I'll describe as the northern edge to the Sky campus, the eastern edge to Grant Way, the southern edge to Syon Lane, and the western edge to McFarlane Lane and Oaklands Avenue. And what's unique in this is that they're all very, very different relationships. To the north, we have the Water Gardens, you know, an area really largely forgotten and hidden behind the rear of the Tesco store and the boundary of the Sky campus. To the east on Grant Way, we have a route that provides vehicular and pedestrian access from Syon Lane to the Sky campus, and ultimately for Sky employees going from Syon Line station to the Sky campus. It's a street that's quite green, it's got existing trees, it's not particularly overlooked, and it's very much a vehicle dominated environment, but that links you up to that Sky campus. On that northern side to the Water Gardens is a fence, and that fence runs right along the northern boundary and also the full extent of the western boundary to McFarlane Lane. So the combination of those fences on the north and the west mean that connectivity between the metropolitan open land, the open space to the northwest there, that it's a barrier to movement, it's a barrier to pedestrian connectivity between local facilities and local assets. McFarlane Lane has taken on even greater importance with the opening of the Boulder Academy, and it's a route used for school children to head from Syon Lane up to the school. And at the moment, that route has no natural surveillance, no windows, no overlooking, and is fenced in, as I said. And it's not a particularly pleasant or safe route, particularly on dark evenings or mornings or so on. And then to the south, we've got the existing buildings on Syon Lane at a number of different angles that they overlook the Tesco car park and petrol station. There is some mature planting on the verge to the north of the road there, but this is an open aspect, an open vista, with the main vehicle access to the Tesco superstore pretty much central within the site. But I think so we've had to respond. Yes, we're responding to wider context, wider heritage assets, but we're also responding to very local and very contextual issues about connectivity and movement, not just now and today, but in the future, about opportunities, links, footways, connections that might come as part of the Great West Corridor master plan. Okay, so I'll just move on now to next slide, please, to some photographs, and obviously, Mum, you'll see this on your site visit, but I think it's just worth looking at some of these in context. The top left slide shows the Tesco store, a view looking north. You can see the Sky campus in the background there. And then the view, the next one along, number 2, you can see the vast area of surface car parking with the Tesco store to the left and the clock tower of the Gillette building there on the skyline in the distance. The third view then shows very much the car-dominated environment, the petrol filling station to the right of that image, which fronts onto Syon Lane. Then image 4 gives you that feeling of McFarlane Lane that I talked about, which is the fenced in, the route up to the Boulder Academy. And then to the right of that slide, number 5, shows the Water Gardens as they exist today, bordering onto the Sky campus. And then number 6 shows that view further along. And we see the water gardens, a real potential to make quite a special space as part of this plan, utilising at the moment, again, another area of underutilised space. Slide 7 shows the vehicle access into Grant Way, which is also used for pedestrians accessing the Sky Academy, and you can see some of the mature planting that exists on the left-hand side. And then number 8 are the current homes on the south of Cyan Lane, semi-detached homes, predominantly with car parking to the front, some maisonettes as part of that frontage as well. And then number 9 shows the area further to the west of the site, where we've got the existing trees as part of that grass verge which have been retained. So it gives a little feeling there of some of the edges that I described in that previous slide. Okay, what opportunities do we think the site offered at a local level? I think the blue lines there start to show some of both the existing pedestrian routes that I've described and some of the future ones, including the potential link identified in the Opportunity Area Master Plan of the link towards the Golden Mile Station, and how very much we've got what appears like a site with a square site, 4 corners, but actually connectivity from each of those 4 corners into the site starts to allow us to connect into those surrounding facilities. And the 2 yellow areas show the opportunity that we saw of creating new public spaces, perhaps of slightly different character, as areas that bring and are a confluence of where those routes join. On this slide, we also emphasise where we've looked to create views towards the local landmark, the Gillette building, by the orientation of the streets from within the new master plan. And then in the black, we start to show some of the frontages that we imagine providing natural surveillance and overlooking on all 4 sides of the site, overlooking Grant Way on that key route, overlooking Cyan Lane, overlooking the route on McFarlane Lane, and overlooking the newly regenerated water gardens. And then the image on the right is about greening, and I said in the introduction, it's this project's not just about buildings, but it's about the spaces in between. And actually the landscape-led approach to this started with this idea of a green halo, a green envelope to the scheme, as it were, that linked up all of those existing green assets, whether it be south on Cyan Lane, the greenery on Grant Way, the water gardens, or McFarlane Lane and its link towards the MOL in the northwest corner. And again, if you're combining that with the idea of these pedestrian routes, very much a green edge to this new neighbourhood. Next slide, please. In also dealing with constraints, there are numbers you imagine on sites like this. For the grey circles there represent areas where height has to respect neighbours, and I'll explain how we do that. And that's particularly along the boundary to McFarlane Lane, the area that sits within the conservation area, and backing onto Oaklands Drive. The relationship to the south, to Cyan Lane, being those 2 particular areas, the south and the west. We've also got the blue lines, which are the clean air routes as part of that wider connectivity of the Great West Corridor Master Plan. And other things, we've got rights of access for retrieving bulls, which is the area in the northwest purple area in the northwest corner. So as you would imagine on a site like this, a whole range of different constraints, and actually the role then also of the Gillette building, and particularly the clock tower and finding in providing legibility, particularly on that route from Sky Campus through to Cyan Lane Station. Thank you. Next slide. While focusing local, I think we also need, and we're fully aware as part of this design process, of the importance of strategic views, particularly from those wider heritage assets. And this is an extract from the Great West Corridor Local Plan, November 2020, showing some of those views that were identified in that document. Further, we agreed a whole range of LVIAs, or actually the LVIAs were agreed prior to our appointment back in, I think, October of 2019, with London Borough of Hounslow identifying a whole range of views to be considered as part of this application, and particularly reference to the this Tesco site, the relationship to Syon Park and to Osterley Park in particular. Next slide, please. For us, I think this project, in the creation of a new neighbourhood, is about placemaking. Places that are people focused, that provide a quality place to live, and that's a driver for how we approach projects. So I'll just take you quickly through this sequence of 9 slides. I think we start really with number 1, which is protecting and enhancing those local assets, and in particular we draw reference to the green perimeter and the water gardens. In number 2, we established the new connections, very much this idea of the routes, pedestrian routes coming in on the 4 corners, and creating really a network of streets, footways, and public realm that allows this new neighbourhood to knit and connect into its surroundings, utilising both current opportunities and future-proofing it for ones that potentially may occur in the future. We then created the 2 new public spaces, which I'll describe further later, which is the clearing in red and the meander in green. And then particularly we see this as a pedestrian dominated environment, so limiting vehicle access to really the existing access to the south of Syon Lane, and generally we see our streets as being green streets, walkable streets, and limited only limited accessibility and servicing. The network of those streets and spaces define really some in white the development parcels as we see it, to come forward each in their own reserved matters application, but there's a very strong skeleton, a very strong framework to the neighbourhood that is defined in the parameter plans that set this out. And then the height parameters, of which this is a synopsis of, I suppose, a design evolution, and a journey sees height lower and drop down to create a sensitive transition to the existing properties to the south and to the west. And we saw it was more appropriate to have height further to the north and the northwest. And you can see the graduation of heights as we go from the south and the west towards the north. Obviously, within this diagram, further nuances of which we are explained in my proof of how we made alterations to the height to respond to some of the key views. We see buildings or features or art or public space as providing features to provide legibility and wayfinding through the neighbourhood, which is slide 7. And then on number 8, we're getting all of the stuff that we have to deal with, the very limited car parking, the extensive bike provisions, cycle parking provision, the bins, all the things that in some way create very poor streets, we tuck within the centre of the blocks of those development parcels to ensure we're creating streets that have got eyes on the street, have got natural surveillance, and all that very necessary back of house stuff is contained in those dark areas within the blocks. And which I'll explain on the next slide, you then see really this framework of what we imagine will be a vibrant and an interesting public realm. Next slide, please. This aerial view concentrates really on the idea of the clearing. So we've got our 3 public spaces, the clearing on the east, the water gardens to the north, and the meander to the west. And very much we see the idea of this new space. And as I've described, it's on that pedestrian route from Sky Campus to Syon Lane Station and the neighbourhoods to the south, but also from the Boulder Academy in the north and the northwest. That these routes lead you to this new public space. And we heard very much in the introduction about on Tuesday about the provision of local facilities and local uses, and here we've really got the opportunity, as we set out in our key, to provide a whole range of mixed uses, which potentially in the future could include pharmacies, GPs, community halls. We really see this as a neighbourhood, a local heart, a local hub, providing this range of mixed uses around a new public space, which is orientated north-south, enabling great penetration of natural sunlight into that space. So next slide, please. And all that culminates in our illustrative master plan. And this is a way that we've interpreted, is one way that we've interpreted the parameters that we've set out in the outline planning application, in the set of parameter plans, and also our interpretation of our design code. So this is one way in which those are interpreted. You can see the combination of the buildings defining the spaces. And particularly, I draw your attention to a couple of things. The first is on Scion Lane. You can see the way that we've introduced houses, or in this case, 3-storey townhouses lining the podium, which create a scale transition between the new neighbourhood and the homes on Scion Lane, which sit some 40 metres plus away from those frontages. You'll also then notice the small number of townhouses within the conservation area on the western boundary, where we've introduced those buildings that provide a secure back-to-back relationship to the existing homes on Oaklands Avenue. We provide adequate separation distance. Those homes are 2-storey, unlike the 3-storey on Scion Lane, and the design code includes particular detail about how their amenity space effectively looks south-east, if there are any roof terraces in those buildings. So particularly those two areas in how we deal with some of those more sensitive transition. You will also then see the new alignment of McFarlane Lane that's now lined by buildings. So the route from Scion Lane up to the Buller Academy will now be, have overlooking natural surveillance, as will Grant Way, the route up to the Sky campus. We've got buildings with windows and balconies overlooking those key routes. And to the north, the water gardens themselves also have a degree of overlooking from the homes there. Thank you. Next slide, please. Now, as part of our illustrative scheme, as I said, we've interpreted to show a vision of what this new place could look like. And obviously each phase has to come forward as a reserved matters application interpreting the design code, following that. And I think what we've worked very carefully at in the design code is to identify those mandatory requirements. In that document, there are boxes in blue. It's very, very clear what the expectation is for each of those phases when they come forward. But this is an illustration of what the clearing might appear like, the new mixed-use space, combination of natural, of green and more hard landscape, as I said, with its north-south orientation, good penetration of sunlight into that space. And overall, 45% of the site, as identified within that framework, within that skeleton, the parameter plan, is public realm. Next slide, please. In terms of those local views we've identified in the constraints, we've particularly aligned the lane, which is our east-west street running through the scheme, to frame that view of the clock tower for legibility reasons. Next slide. And again, another view, what it might feel like in the clearing. We feel we've got the opportunity, there's the opportunity for a range of mixed uses here. I think also what the future of work is post-COVID, opportunities for home working or small, WeWork type opportunities, local scale employment, as well as cafes, restaurants, community facilities and other supporting uses in this area. And overall, there's 46,000 or square feet of commercial space included within the development specification and the outline planning application. Next slide, please. This is the image of the water gardens. What it could be like. We imagine in its regenerated state, very natural landscape of wildflower meadows, of water, part of our attenuation strategy, and perhaps in contrast to the clearing, which we see as perhaps an area of activity and hubbub. The water gardens perhaps provide those areas of quieter respite and seclusion within the scheme. Next slide, please. And that's another view, this time of the water gardens looking to the east towards Grant Way, and the connection to Sky Campus. I think there's a real opportunity for biodiversity here. We're confident we'll achieve in excess of 10% biodiversity net gain as part of this project, and hopefully more as we get into the detail. Next slide, please. And then our third of our spaces is called the Meander. We see this as much more of a natural space, again on a north-south orientation. Perhaps opportunities for children's play here, integrated within the more naturalistic landscape. Overall, we're planting over 300 trees as part of the proposal for the Tesco site. Next slide. And this is to the north, so this is the entrance to on Grant Way to the Sky campus. This is looking south. The scheme and the parameter plans include the provision of a mobility hub, a bus turnaround. We also provide 2 options within the parameter plans for different bus routes to accommodate those services today, but also flexibility in the future. And this mobility hub provides for a range of modes of transport. Thank you. Next slide, please. Onto the Scion Lane frontage. You can see here the 2 typologies that we propose front onto Scion Lane. First of all is the 3-storey townhouses that wrap the podium. We believe provide a sensitive transition between the homes, some 40 metres to the south across Scion Lane. The retained verge with some retained trees plus some new tree planting. And then the sort of what we call the Scion Lane typology, building typology, which is perpendicular to the street running north-south, with the height of that set at the height of the parapet to the Gillette building that you can see there further in the distance to the east. So overall, we provide for 1,677 homes as part of this. Sounds a very precise number as part of this application, with 35% of that affordable. Next slide. And here, this is a view from the entrance, the current entrance into the Tesco store, but the new Grant Way. And again, you can see the way that in this, and I appreciate still illustrative, gives a feeling of the building typologies, but also the materials that we imagine being a variety of materials, slightly different architecture between some of the buildings that are set out in the design code. Thank you. Next slide. Now onto heights and massing. We had some principles that we've applied. So first of all, as I talked about before, the respecting the existing edges to the south and the west, where we brought lower scale buildings. This was the first move. Secondly, referencing the existing buildings, particularly the Gillette building on the Scion Lane frontage and the reference to the parapet there. Thirdly, then celebrating existing spaces, providing enclosure, perhaps the opportunity to optimise the site in the north and the northeast, and then using focal buildings as markers and really providing that legibility to announce the presence of this new neighbourhood hub, this new neighbourhood focus by buildings that perhaps just pop above the height of others on the skyline as markers to those new public spaces. Next slide. This will be covered in Mr. Roberts' evidence, but also in the roundtable discussion. But I've included here some slides on the provision of landscape and open space, which you see on the left-hand side in blue, and the play area strategy on the right there. So Mr. Roberts will go into more detail on the classifications of those different play spaces and communal spaces that for London Plan and London Borough Hounslow. Next slide. Lots of discussion and debate about single aspect and dual aspect homes. The development specification, well, within this illustrative master plan, we were getting 51% overall, or sorry, 55% overall of dual aspect. The development specification sets out a minimum of 50%. You will note as we go up the building from the lower floors to the higher floors, as we get to the higher floors, we're up to 70% dual aspect. At the time of the submission and the time of the committee resolution to approve this scheme, these levels of dual aspect homes were deemed acceptable by the GLA. Now, we have got the opportunity in coming forward in future reserve matters applications to improve that, and my proof of evidence illustrates ways in which we can increase the number of dual aspect homes as part of future reserve matters to come forward in the future. Thank you. Next round. I've just included one of the parameter plans, which is the key distance drawing. This is about particular relationships between the development parcels and the public realm in white that defines them. There are a series of minimum dimensions. You'll see here particularly the hierarchy, the boulevard, which is the north-south street from Sign Lane heading northwards, is 20 metres wide, while the lanes running east-west are 18 metres wide. It gives minimum dimensions for the width of the clearing and for the width of the meander too, and other key distances, including relationship to Macfarlane Lane. I think all of these are set out in the parameter plans, but I think it was useful just to include one sample drawing to show you the type of detail that's on those frameworks. Next slide. And then from the framework, we're then going into greater detail, setting out some of the envisaged building typologies and their materials. As I said in the introduction, you see the mandatory design principles in the blue box. We believers in making design codes very clear and very navigable, and then how we've been on the right hand side, how those mandatory principles have been interpreted as part of the illustrative work that we've done. So that's the left hand slide, and then on the right hand side, setting out in detail the design of the new spaces, the type of tree species, the type of natural landscape, in this particular instance with reference to the water gardens. So the design code is there as part of the core documents, and I think sets out hopefully how we will achieve high quality design as part of the delivery of this new neighbourhood. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adams. I'm getting a bit of feedback. Maybe you could mute for the moment, Mr. Adams. I think that's probably where it's coming from. Sorry. Bit better? Yes. Ma'am, I don't have any other points to raise with Mr. Adams in chief. He picked up all the things that we'd spoken about beforehand, so I'm very grateful to him. That's the evidence in chief. Thank you.
Super, thank you very much. Mr. Linus, do you have a best guess at the time estimate?
Hopefully no more than 40 minutes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm just thinking if it was longer, just whether there was, you would indicate, well, please would you indicate an appropriate time for a break if needs be? No,
having heard Mr. Adams, I suspect we won't be as long with him today as we were with Mr. Patel yesterday. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Adams.
I'll allow mute. Good morning, Mr. Linus.
Good morning. First question, please. Again, as I asked Mr. Patel yesterday, we've seen the letter of appointment for the inquiry that's included in your appendices, but it's not the letter of appointment or a brief for the preparation of the proposals. Was a letter of appointment or brief given to you in writing for your work on these proposals, please?
Yes, a letter of appointment was provided. My proof of evidence, page 4, section 1.3, provides a very extensive summary of our brief, and obviously, as you will imagine, an appointment letter contains numbers of commercial aspects, and I think in some way I'd leave it to others to decide on that. But I think we made particular attention in my proof of evidence to ensure that the architectural and landscape brief that was set out on page 4 was extensive.
Well, I mean, can I still ask for a copy of that letter? Obviously, if there's any commercial aspects to it, they can be redacted, but can I ask for a copy of that letter and any formal brief to be provided, please? As I think was the original.
If I leave that to Mr. Warren to answer, but I'm not being defensive. I need to take instruction from my client on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, second heading, please, heritage considerations. And again, can you just take out, please, the design and access statement that was prepared for this scheme? I just want to ask a couple of questions on this, please. CD 4.4, ma'am. I think you have a paper copy of this, don't you?
Yes, I think.
Okay, if we just have a quick flick through this, please. We have the site context analysis, which starts on page 23, section 2. And just to see what has been done, if we go through section 2.2 on the strategic context you identified already there, and go to page 31. There you identify the historic context under the heading local context, and you mention there Austerley under the heading historic context and Sion House, obviously certainly there. So there's nothing in the design and access statement looking at context to look at the potential relationship between Q or the Thames Path and these assets, is there?
There is reference to Q. There is no reference to the towpath.
No, there's nothing in terms of an assessment of the potential relationship between the site and these assets, is there?
But no, there is not. And as you would be aware, the timing of the indication of those assets, actually in the letter from Historic England to us dated the 28th of May, makes no reference to the towpath or to Kew Gardens in the response.
We'll come on to the HE in a moment. I'm just looking at the way the design and access statement is describing how the design was influenced. Okay.
Okay.
If one looks at page 50, then please keep flicking on section 2.7, heritage and townscape. There's a reference to the history and development pattern, which talks about the urban growth, the historic parts of Austerley, nearby neighbourhoods. Then it's the history of Tesco site, and then interwar commerce over the page on 52, and the Golden Mile on 53 and 54 and 55. You see all that? So it's fair to say that certainly when the DAS was describing the approach that was taken to heritage, all the assessment that was carried out in the DAS related to the immediate townscape rather than the heritage that was further afield. That's right, isn't it?
No, I don't believe that's true. I think there is plenty of reference in there to Austerley Park and to Sion Park.
Well, as far as the site context analysis looking at heritage and townscape is concerned, it all focused on the immediate area. There's nothing in section 2.7 relating to the big factories on page 52, the Golden Mile, Manor House. There's Austerley and Spring Grove Station on page 54. There's Gillette Building, I'll give you that. There's a reference to Austerley House singly on page 55, but there's nothing there generally about the relationship between the site and heritage in its wider sense on assets further afield, is there?
I think we refer page 58 to response to grade 2 listed buildings, the conservation area, to Austerley Park, particularly.
Where's Austerley Park?
Page 58, Green Edge.
Yes, the Green Edge. I mean, that was referenced in the sense of the green edge to the site. There's nothing there in terms of the assessment about the site and the heritage context wider afield, is there?
Yeah.
Any of them?
I think we include a whole section actually under alignment with the Great West Corridor Strategic Objectives in the next chapter, which includes on page 92 the extract which I showed in my proof of evidence, which is the appreciation of those wider strategic views and the heritage assets. So, you know, I think in my presentation, I think I made it very clear how we considered both the local and the impact on both the local and wider assets.
I'm going to come on to aspect of that. I'm looking at what was in the mind at the time that you're saying in the design and access statement, you're actually coming up with the design of the scheme. Okay. Now again, there I do accept that in 58 there's a reference to building heights, which says heights respond to important views and surrounding buildings. But again, as far as the explanation of how the design of the scheme was influenced, there's nothing there to identify what were considered to be important at the time, and why they were important or what needed to be done? Is there?
I suppose within that particular section, in that first section, no.
Okay, thank you. Then if we go on to page 71, please. Initial ideas, 3.4.
Sorry, page?
71, sorry, page 71.
Yeah.
Section 3.4.
Yeah.
And actually page 70 above it as well. The initial ideas, which is where you should have started in terms of what you were really directing your attention at as far as the scheme was concerned. If one looks through these initial ideas, which you confirmed in your presentation, green edges on page 70, strong geometry from the north, key main square, central geometry, and so on. And it's fair to say, isn't it, Mr. Adams, that these initial ideas really formed the basis of the scheme. None of those key ideas, as expressed in the design and access statement, had any identifiable relationship with heritage, local or wider.
What you see on pages 70 and 71, as you rightly described, are our initial ideas, which then went through a design evolution, which is set out very clearly within my proof of evidence. If I can refer you to page 147 particularly, we talk about the relocation of FOCA buildings and new markers to public spaces, and we say that townscape analysis has informed the location of these focal buildings, and that that's very clearly set out about the iterative design process, the meeting that took place with Historic England on the 17th of February. Yes. Prior to that, a whole set of LVIA views that had been agreed with London Borough of Hounslow. And again, as I set out in my proof, how the design of the scheme evolved to respond to some of those issues raised as part of the LVIA.
I will go through other aspects of the evolution. I'm just looking at your starting points. It's a very short point, Mr. Adams. But okay. As far as your initial ideas are concerned, there's nothing in terms of your starting point, as it were, to suggest that local or even wider heritage was a fundamental input into your initial ideas, is there?
No, I disagree. If page 145, and I'll read it from you, the proposed height and massing at suitable locations responds to both the analysis of the existing context and iterative development to the master plan. The following principles of guide it: relate, connect to the existing context and built form, consider application of height and orientation with the existing context, and identify buildings which address their particular role in the master plan.
Yes, well, come on to, as I said, I'm going to come on to how you dealt with height and massing as part of the evolution of the plan, but I'll move on from the initial ideas. If we look at the design narrative then, which you're beginning to take me to, Mr. Adams, it starts on page 102, section 4.1.
Yes.
Okay, so you've got protect, enhance, connect, and create on page 102. Right. And limit, and then you've got massing there, number 7. Massing of the blocks create a series of finger and courtyard blocks with greater height towards the northern and eastern boundaries. Parking, develop, then develop wayfinding, and then the master plan layout. Again, when one's looking at the fundamental parts of that narrative, there is a reference to greater height towards the northern and eastern boundaries, but again, nothing as far as those fundamental parts of the design narrative are concerned to relate to the wider heritage context as a fundamental aspect of the design narrative there, is there?
Within that section, no.
No, thank you. And if we go on to other pages that I think you referred to, page 146. You start with the heights and massing principles that you think you've mentioned before, If we look at the second paragraph, it says, from the outset, the project recognised the need to carefully and successfully bridge the transition of scale between the domestic scale of Austerley's surrounding housing stock and the industrial scale of the large factory buildings along Great West Road. So I'll come back to scale later, but just given we've looked at that paragraph, you obviously were setting up as a criterion for the success of the scheme the need to transition in scale between the surrounding housing stock and what you had on the Great West Road. Is that fair?
It is.
Okay, so you saw the site as a transition, did you?
The edges, the southern and western edges, as a transition, yes.
Southern and western, okay. And one looks at the heights and massing principles that you have set out there, connect to the existing context and built form, application of height and orientation within existing context. There's nothing there, and we'll see is actually page 147 that you've mentioned, referencing existing buildings, celebrating existing spaces, and focal buildings as markers to new public spaces. There's nothing there, is there, Mr. Adams, to identify that heritage assets, at least beyond the immediate area, formed a meaningful input into heights and massing principles? Is there?
I think the last line, townscape analysis is a form the location of these focal buildings.
Yes, but again, there's nothing there as far as your analysis and the explanation you set out in the design and access statement to indicate how views from heritage assets, at least further afield, actually influenced any choices you were taking in the design, is there?
Not on this page.
No. And if one looks at the way that you were describing the massing principles here, respecting existing edges, referencing existing buildings, celebrating existing spaces, and then focal buildings. Again, there's nothing in that part of the design and access statement which provides a positive design rationale for going as high as the parameters plans propose, is there?
No.
No, thank you.
Other than seeing in the context and the reference to the Great West Corridor master plan and the identification of the Tesco site as a tall buildings cluster,
okay,
and the accompanying documents that we included in the section 3 of the DAS.
Okay, I'll come back to the emerging plan briefly. Okay, thank you. So I've got your answer on that. Next heading, please. Design, process, and historic England. Now, I think you say in the design access statement you were appointed in October 2019. Is that correct?
We were actually appointed on the 7th of November 2019.
All right. Okay. Let me just check out. I've got that. So November. Sorry. I think I'd taken a reference from a part of the design and access statement which said October.
Okay. Apologies for that.
Yes, page 66 says October, but it doesn't matter. And you then had 2 pre-app rounds with the council in January and March, and then I think the DRP was in February. Ultimately, the following year as well. But you mentioned Historic England were presented to on the 17th of February 2020. Do you recall that?
Yeah, that's correct.
Very much. And again, one thing that I thought I'd just put to you briefly is that when the design evolution is described in the design and access statement, and the nature of the work that was done through the design process to consult, I may have missed it, but I didn't see any reference to the meeting with HE or any response to it when you were describing the evolution of the design process and design and access statement. Is that right? Yes,
I don't think there is no reference to that meeting.
Yeah, so there's nothing in the design and access statement at least to indicate how at the time you thought you were responding to HE concerns, is there?
No, my proof of evidence I think sets out how we did respond to the issues. There was a period of time, that meeting was the 17th of February, And actually the written response from Historic England was actually not received for some 3 months plus later, on the 28th of May, so some 14 weeks later. In that intervening period, the design evolved to respond to some of the verbal feedback given at that meeting, and that's set out very clearly in my proof of evidence.
Yeah, so
design evolution.
Just let me go to your proof, please. 4.8.5. You said following the presentation, further townscape study.
Sorry, bear with me, please, Mr. Linus. What page is that, please? 4.8.5
on page 66 of your proof.
Thank you very much.
Okay. You said that following the presentation, further townscape studies were requested and issued on the 23rd of April, showing wireline views of both schemes. So insofar as you're trying to at least imply any criticism of Historic England for not replying until May, partly because we were waiting on you to provide us with visual information, which didn't arrive until 2 months after the meeting. That's right, isn't it?
That's your interpretation, Mr. Linus. I would say that the period of time, we walked with all of this. We're always keen to respond to issues raised, of which we've done here, and I don't think that's a negative at all.
Well, no, I don't want to labour the point, Mr. Adams, but it's not justified to somehow criticise HE for the time taken to respond when we were waiting for a large amount of that time for you to provide more material following the meeting. That's right, isn't it?
I don't recollect that in the letters. The request for those. I think there was a request for other studies, yes, but actually, there are notes in here which refer to what was being asked for as part of any iterative process. I wouldn't expect, in a meeting when someone said, "Can you go away and look at this?" not to confirm that in writing until that had been provided. You would put that in a letter. But look, I'm not going to, I'm not casting any dispersions on Historic England and their response to that letter.
Just wanted to confirm that. Thank you. Now let's move on. You say on page 66 of 486 that feedback was provided on the 20th of May.
Yeah.
I suggest that we only raise concerns with the impact within view 14, now AVR-S. We just want to check that, please. If we can get out, please, CD 12.2, which is the letter from the 20th of May 2020.
Yeah.
Just to confirm the position. First of all, on the third page from the back, there's a heading about a third of the way down, Historic England's position. Do you see that?
Third page.
Third page from the end, yes.
Oh, from the end.
Yes, sorry. It's easier to count from the back in this one.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's clear that if you look at the second paragraph under that heading, it's right, isn't it, that we're also registering concerns about Austerley Park. We weren't restricting our concerns to a single view on Sion Park, were we?
Yeah, if I can refer you to the third page, and I'll read from it. The development process does not physically impact on any of the designated heritage assets. However, the result of the height and massing of the scheme, a visual impact will be appreciable from a wide range of vantage points, include both registered landscapes at Austerley and Sion Parks.
Yes.
So it would vary something to do with the trees. So I think particularly number view 14 has been particularly raised as an issue. I think we were also, that's specifically of concern. We're obviously aware that there are the views of which there is an impact on.
Yes, I mean the simple point is, Mr. Adams, you'd accept that what you say in your proof about HE only raising concerns about impacts from view 14 isn't actually correct.
Okay.
Very minimum, we were raising concerns about Austerley as well, weren't we?
Okay, I think if we changed, if we said predominantly or mainly concerned with that.
Well, I'm not sure. I would actually, Mr. Adams, but anyway, Director has the point. And then if one looks at Syon Park as well, the first paragraph under Historic England's position, view 14 in particular, is mentioned. But if one looks at the letter,
which page are we on, please?
Sorry, it's back to the third page from the back, ma'am, under the heading Historic England's position. Okay. And it says, like the proposed Homebase site, the proposed development will be visible from Syon Park, the first paragraph. View 14 in particular suggests a harmful impact on the registered landscape. However, the extent of visibility is likely restricted to the western park and not likely to impact Q, to what you said before. Now, just taking that and reading the letter as a whole, as you already pointed out, Mr. Adams, on the third page, the paragraph that you took me to, there was reference to a visual impact being appreciable from a wide range of vantage points, including within Syon Park. So whilst I accept entirely that there was specific reference made to view 14, it was view 14 in particular in the context of a wider range of vantage points. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, I think there is an impact on a wider number of vantage points, yes.
Thank you very much. And if one looks to the final page of the letter, there's the second paragraph, says wire lines have been used for all the distant views while the massing is under review, not fixed. In order to better understand the visual impacts, we recommend some accurate verified views that depict the articulation being provided at the next stage. And as we previously requested, I would also be grateful to provide us with the relevant view city data so we're able to more thoroughly analyse the impact of proposals as soon as possible. So again, although reference had been made to view 14 in that letter, other views were mentioned, and HE was also saying that we still needed to more thoroughly analyse the wider impact. That's right, isn't it? That's correct. Yes, and the view city data was never provided, was it?
I think we provided a range of material throughout that engagement process, which included a range of different images.
Okay, but I don't think that the view city data.
I think I'll let other people refer to this that are more knowledgeable than I be, but my understanding is the information and the methodology, perhaps which we'll cover in other evidence, is much more accurate than the view city data.
Okay. Now let's move on. Next heading, please. Advice from Heritage Consultant, please.
Okay.
Now, in your proof, sticking on page 66, in response to the point that had been raised by Historic England, you say the design team identified the proposed heights and massing occupied the backdrop of the Gillette building. Discussions with KM Heritage regarding the elements of the clock tower of the Gillette building and their components identified the green weathered copper clock face as a key element where the silhouette should be independent of any development. So just let me understand this then, that obviously the evolution of the design, even on your evidence now, was based upon the advice that you were getting from KM Heritage at the time. That's fair, isn't it?
With KM Heritage, yes, plus Townscape Consultants, and I also feedback from London Borough of Hounslow in the pre-apps, feedback from the GLA, and as you rightly said, going back to the discussions with Historic England at that meeting in February.
Yes, I mean I can ask obviously others about this, but on its face, the way you described that there, Mr. Adams, the sort of focus on Gillette building, it doesn't actually say anything about the setting, the contributions the setting makes in views from Syon Park.
Sorry, bear with me one moment, please.
Just so that I'm clear about the question, Mr. Linus, are you talking about the setting of the Gillette building or the setting of the park?
Syon Park, yes. There's reference made to the backdrop of the Gillette building, but there's nothing there to indicate what approach is being taken to the setting of Syon Park.
Can I, Mr. Linus, can I refer you to page 76, please?
Of your proof?
Of my proof, yes, please.
Okay. Yeah.
Page 76 or section 4.13.3. The scheme was designed to respond to the longer distance views from heritage assets identified in the VIA and agreed with London Borough Hounslow, including views from within World Heritage Site, Osterley, Sion RPG, Osterley RPG. Design scheme was also designed to respond to and enhance local views of heritage assets, including the Gillette building. And then in 4.13.6, as a result of ongoing design development process and our dialogue with Historic England and London Borough of Hounslow, height and massing was repositioned to reduce the impact of the Tesco development on views from Sion RPG, as shown of views and plans on this page, which particularly refers to view 14. You can see the wire line number 1 at the top, and then at the bottom showing how we had amended that scheme to bring effectively the height below the copper top of the Gillette Tower.
Yes, I'm just interested in the analysis. I'll have a look at the heritage impact assessment in a moment, but the advice that you were effectively receiving was that really all you had to do was drop it below the copper the copper clock tower on Gillette building. Is that right? Is it?
I think there's a similar view from Osterley Park, which the repositioning and the change in the height had a similar effect. Our advice, as you've seen in the heritage statement, refers to no harm, and I think that in some way has, you can see on the bottom image there, that actually the majority of the scheme, particularly outlined green, on a winter's view is set below the tree line and largely obscured by the trees.
Well, no, I'm not looking for your analysis of heritage.
No, I'll refer that to Mr. Mealy. Thank you.
I'm looking at what you were being told at the time as you were developing the design of the scheme. As I understand it, the advice that you were getting from KM Heritage was that all you needed to do was drop the height by reference to the copper clock face of Gillette building as a key element.
As we're all aware that design is a complexity of a range of issues which we all have to strike into balance. And one particular issue is the height of that relationship is one particular area that we responded to, and in the context of the site identified within the Great West Corridor opportunity area and a tall building cluster. So I don't want to avoid answering your question, but that was one bit of advice that KM Heritage gave us, was in particular relationship to that top amongst a whole range of other input from other stakeholders.
I understand that, Mr. Adams. I'm asking you from the sort of heritage perspective, just so I can be clear what the approach was. That the advice that you were getting, which was then influencing what you did about views in Sion Park, was based on treating those views out by reference to the green weathered copper clock face of the Gillette building as a key element.
That's what I would agree. That's one I get.
And as you confirmed, notwithstanding the approach that's now being taken in evidence to this inquiry, the advice that you were getting all the while was that there was no harm being caused in views from Sion Park. That's right, isn't it?
That's correct.
Thank you very much. Which is not the position being taken at this inquiry, correct?
Obviously, Mr. Mealy has revisited that and has his own view, yes, and has a different view.
Thank you very much. And if one goes to the, I don't know if you have a copy of it, Mr. Adams, but if one goes to the Heritage Impact Assessment, this is the correct one, hopefully, this morning, CD 2.4. Page 63.
Page
63.
Okay. So can someone in my team, I need to, the thing has shut out. Bear with me, Mr. Linus, I'm sorry.
Okay.
My computer with the core documents has shut down. I've got CD 2.4, but I'm afraid I hadn't got page 63. Hold on. It's okay, Andrew, thank you. CD 2.4. Page
60. It's internal page 63. Not sure what it'll be on the electronic version.
Is that the PDF page 63?
No.
The actual real numbered page 63.
Number 63. Yeah.
Okay.
See if I can find it.
Got page 6. Yeah, page 63.
Okay, thank you. So again, we don't have Mr. Chem Heritage here, but one sees page 63 is the end of paragraph 5.5, which begins on page 62 actually. And if you look at paragraph 5.5, there is a reference to Scion there. It says, do not rely on an empty skyline. This idea is not supported by the existing reality of the setting or emerging policy. In the case of Scion, it's also important to note that the tower of the Gillette building, notwithstanding its grade 2 listed building, is not directly related to the significance of Scion Park or its buildings. If it is thought the Scion skyline should largely be free of modern development, the 20th century incursion should not be present, nor any other modern development that can at present be seen from Scion Park. Do you see that?
I do.
So, as I understand it, just so I can be clear about the advice you were getting at the time, it seems as if you were being advised, well, there's other modern development that's already in the view. Therefore, that justifies you putting more development in the views from Scion Park. Appears to be an influence in the advice that you were being given at the time, Mr. Adams, is that right?
Yeah, so I don't know if anyone else, Mr. Linus, you broke up then actually. I don't know if anyone else had a problem. Could you repeat the question, please? Because I had a gap in the middle there.
Yes, okay. The advice that appears to have been given, if the HIA is correct, that, well, there are other modern buildings in the view, therefore there is not going to be any harm caused by this one.
I think that paragraph is saying there are other buildings, yes, in the within the view, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and it appears to be the basis upon which the conclusion was reached that no harm would be caused by adding this one.
I'm not KM Heritage. I think that is a question for addressed to Mr. Mealy. Okay,
thank you. Right, let's move on, please. Design review panel, please. Now,
which document, please, Mr. Linus?
Let's look at the DAS, please. Go back to the DAS, page 74. Bear with me while I get it back out. If we go to page 74. Yes, this is a reference to design review panel in the first round of DRP comments. And if we look at the second paragraph on, it says there, keep following comments from the first pre-app meeting, movement and access strategy developed further, servicing strategy, pedestrian cycle vehicular routes. That's the summary provided. Then the only mention there of building form principles that have been worked up related to the analysis of the semi-detached houses along Scion Lane and the factories along the Golden Mile. That's just the final paragraph on that page. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, there's nothing mentioned in the DAS there about how any of the overall points raised by the design review panel were addressed. Is there?
I'd like which particular reference to the letter of the design review panel letter of 13th of March. Which particular paragraph are you referring to, Mr. Lyons?
No, I'm asking about a broad question about design and access. There's nothing in the design and access statement to indicate how all the concerns that were raised by the DRP were actually addressed as part of the design going forward. Is there?
The letter from Hounslow Design Review Panel runs to 4 pages. It makes some observations at a wider level. It asks us to look at particular issues, and actually, I think the main emphasis coming out of that meeting was about it. They weren't convinced that the hierarchy of spaces and routes were clear. They asked us to look particularly at the granular level. Looking around, a closer look at local connections around the site at a granular level would enhance your urban thinking to allow the master plan to knit more successfully into the urban fabric. I think that was a particular issue that was raised in that letter. They talked about importance of buffers and thresholds to be marked between private and public. They talked about movement, again the word granular. When I look at that letter, which is dated 13th of March 2020, my proof of evidence perhaps goes into greater detail, but I think page 74 provides a summary of some of the issues that were raised at that meeting.
Right, I don't think we've got that letter in front of the inquiry, but anyway, I couldn't see in the DAS anything which specifically indicated how you responded to the first DRP. Okay. But that's right as a matter of fact, isn't it, Mr. Adams? There's nothing in the DAS to show that, is there? I
think page 74 responds to that.
Okay. Anyway, we have your proof where you go into a little bit more detail on the DRP process. If you go to page 69, and I just want to have a very quick look at how this sits with the DRP response that came later, the final DRP response is at CD 411. I'll just take that out, please.
Yes, okay.
And if we have a look at this letter, please, the first paragraph after the introduction, very pleased Tesco Homebase returned to the design review panel for the chair's review. We commend you on the changes that have been made in response or on board with project aims. It says, however, we still feel that the overall amount of residential accommodation is too great for the site, will affect the ability of the development to achieve its placemaking objectives. If we go over, it says we want further reassurance that all submission documents are explicit about site constraints and are robust enough to protect nearby heritage assets. We were disappointed not to see a more comprehensive master plan. And under the heading Protecting Heritage on that second page, first paragraph, however, you need to be mindful of how you're protecting the broader heritage context, particularly heritage are protected use in the parks. And the second paragraph, although we are supportive of how the design distinguishes between taller elements in the lower linking blocks, we know that these blocks themselves still high and feel there is still too much development for this strategy to be successful. And it goes on to say it may be possible to redistribute density with a different deployment of height with clusters of slender towers, thus bringing it closer to the London Borough of Hounslow's original strategy. Then it goes on to say we would still be concerned about the effect on Gillette and the views in the parks would require view testing. So we draw those together, Mr. Adams. You've frozen on my screen. Can everyone see me?
You froze a while back, but we could hear you.
All right, okay. If you can hear me, I'll keep going.
I can hear you fine.
Okay, thank you. So if we just gather those references together, Mr. Adams, still feel the overall amount of development is too great for the site. The blocks themselves are still high, still too much development for the strategy to be successful. It's clear, isn't it, Mr. Adams, that the design review panel were expressing continuing concerns with fundamental aspects of the scheme?
I think they were raising concerns. I think you know, the final paragraph, which talks about redeployment of height, you know, that they were asking us to consider height in relationship to those issues which you raise. I think we have DRP, and that panel is one of a range of stakeholders, you know, and at this point, you know, post, you know, submission of the application, you know, we had support from both London Borough of Hounslow and from the GLA. You know, we have to, it's you know, striking a balance with the views of different stakeholders, and I think the DRP are one group that make their viewpoint. And as it said, and you rightly said, there was elements on there where they commended us for addressing particular aspects, and there will naturally be areas where we don't agree.
Yes, but just to be clear, Mr. Adams, if one looks on to the conclusion, it says in summary, the panel has fundamental concerns about the scheme and feels that many of the issues highlighted in the first review are still to be fully addressed. So again, fundamental concerns still with the scheme, which continue from concerns that have been expressed beforehand. That's right, isn't it?
That's what they've written. That's correct.
Yes. But then when one looks back to your proof at page 69, where you're identifying what you understood the DRP concerns to be, and you describe those in your evidence as sort of granular. One looks at your page 69. There's nothing in page 69 which gives any indication of addressing what were plainly fundamental concerns of the DRP at the time, relating to the amount of development and massing on the site. That's right, isn't it?
I think we've set on page 69 those issues we have responded to, yes. Well,
no, just answer my question. If one looks at the heading, strategy and infrastructure, movement and connectivity, landscape-led approach, spaces between buildings, building typologies, built form, the way that you've expressed all of those does not give any indication or any suggestion that you have taken on board fundamental DRP concerns about the amount of development and height and massing of development on the site.
Yeah, I think that there's two things going on here. Is that the page you're referring to is reference to DRP1, DRP2, which is the letter you're cross-referencing to, is actually on page 86.
Yes, but I'm looking at how the matters have evolved.
Well, I think we're not quite measuring. You know, what we're responding to is a first letter dated the 13th of March 2020, of which we've addressed in the page you've referred to, which is page 76.
Yes.
On what we responded to at that point. Page 86 very clearly references DRP2, which is what the quotes that you're reading out from, which is CD 4.11. So I don't think we're, you know, as we say on here, the second DRP was conducted prior to submission and feedback was received after then.
Yes, I know, but the reason I asked the questions the way I did, Mr. Adams, was that I'm looking at the letter of the 28th of January, where it's saying that...
So letter 28th of January, yes.
Yes, where they're saying we still have concerns. So it's quite clear from that letter that the concerns that DRP were referencing at the time were ones that they had even at the time of the first DRP. And those concerns relate to the blocks being too high and there being too much development for the strategy to be successful. So it's fair to say, isn't it, Mr. Adams, that these concerns, which the DRP still had, were ones that were being expressed at the first stage?
Yes.
Yes, and when one looks at your proof, to understand the extent to which you address DRP concerns as you need to under policy. There's nothing in your summary of what DRP said at DRP1 to indicate that their fundamental concerns about the heights and scale of development were taken on board by you after DRP1. It's correct, isn't it?
It is.
Thank you very much. And if one then goes on to your DRP2, which you referred to, page 84, again, on page 86 is your evidence. We know, because we've looked at the letter, that they still have fundamental concerns. No evidence from you that those concerns were addressed by considering alternative options for the development on the site. Is there?
That's correct.
Thank you very much. Okay, final point, please, on two final points, please. First, policy. You mentioned the GWC strategic objectives. And again, can we go to the DAS, please, page 92. We'll put the DRP stuff away.
Page, sorry, 92?
Yes, page 92. And here you talk about alignment with GWC strategic objectives. Do you see that?
I do, that's the heading, yep.
Yep, and you refer to strategic objective 12 on page 93, which is to protect and make the most of our unique heritage and historic environment while encouraging innovations in building technology and improving sense of place. And you refer to the master plan proposal, referring to the Gillette Tower, Gateway Marker, etc., etc. And you've referred to the other figures in the DWC review. One appears at page 92. Do you see that?
Yes, that's right.
Now, nothing in the DAS there identified how the design process sought to align with the heights contained in the emerging policy itself. Is there?
There isn't, no.
No, thank you. And again, I can cover this with other witnesses, but nothing in there to indicate how the proposals sat with the heights that were being contained within GWC 5 as you've identified, correct?
I think there's pages, page 99, indicates our interpretation of how the GWC indicative design and how we've responded to it.
Yes, but again, nothing there which assesses or which demonstrates how the proposal sought to align with the heights that were identified in policy, specifically identified in policy. That's right, isn't it?
Nothing specific, no.
And the proposals that you were developing at the time envisaged heights that went beyond the heights identified within policy GWC 5. That's right, isn't it? In a couple of instances, we are higher than that yet, but not, broadly in alignment with the height set out in that. We'll come on to that with other witnesses, but nothing to identify in the DAS how you sought to align yourselves with those heights, correct?
I think page 98 includes an extract of the heights of buildings, which is the extract from the corridor plan. So I think their inclusion within the document would, and that page 99 would infer that we were cognizant of this in developing the design.
Yeah, but certainly, as you've accepted, the heights go beyond what's in the draft policy, and there's no recognition of that within the DAS, is there?
I agree with that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And finally, just a couple of aspects of the design, please. Just do this very quickly. Oaklands Park, I've asked Mr. Patel about other aspects and other views, but if we look at Oaklands Park in the DAS at page 150, you've put illustrative.
Excuse me, can I just get hold of the DAS, please, page?
Sorry, yes, page 150. See that? Sorry, I can't see you, Mr. Adams. Do you have that?
Yes, I do now. Yes, I do. I have page 150. Yes.
Thank you very much. One sees a section there, BB, on page 150, where you're taking a section through to Oaklands Avenue. I think, without getting out the parameters plan, that goes through the shortest building of that group of three. Is that correct?
Yeah, that section. Yeah, the section through BB. You're right. Varies, as you can see on that section. There's 18 metres between the rear of Oaklands Avenue property, number 4748, and the rear of the new properties. They've then got an approximate parameter about 10 metres of the new building.
But the building on the site that the section's taken through, if one looks, we can get out the parameters plan if we need to, so we can save time on this, but those three blocks, if you look at the section, they range from 43 metres up to where the section's taken through up to 59 and then 74 odd metres.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when one looks at the section that appears on page 150, that section doesn't actually indicate the full height of the development that could potentially appear in that section, the full height of the buildings. That's right, isn't it?
It's a section line is taken at one particular position. I think
Yeah.
the parameter plans show that there is a variation of distances between the buildings. I think our parameter plan shows the minimum distance between the rear of properties and the rear of 47, 46 Oaklands Avenue. It also sets out a minimum distance between Block F and the front of those dwellings in a development, extent of a development parcel. So,
it's not the distance, Mr. Adams, it's the height of the buildings that you're showing as part of the section. So there will be far taller buildings than is shown in that section in reality under the parameters plan. That's right, isn't it?
I could not tell you, I'm afraid. Just looking at that, there's a in which drawing are you referring to demonstrate that the height is higher? I've got on the maximum height parameters for building for building F. The height of that building varies between 43.2 AOD and 58.9 AOD. The most northern of those blocks, if that's what you're referring to, the 58.9 AOD is the building that, 2/3 of that building overlooks the MOL, with a little bit of that building overlooking the rear garden of 45 Oaklands. So, as you would expect, there are a variety of conditions around the edges. I think in one of the core documents there will be a whole section of these. There are a whole detail of sections that have been prepared. I would hope that I haven't got my core documents referenced to me at the moment, but if we wanted to interrogate every one of these sections, they're all set out in a document. And as I said, that section is taken through effectively the southern end of block E. So.
Yeah. But the short point, Mr. Adams, sorry to take time over it, is that when one's looking at the relationship between Oaklands Avenue, part of the conservation area, and this western, or this side of the development, you're going to have buildings that along that stretch not just up to 59 metres, go up to 74 metres as well. That's right, isn't it?
74 metres is the maximum parameter of the building to the north, overlooking McFarlane Lane. Not
yes.
Yes, visible from Oaklands Avenue, but not directly facing onto it.
Yes, and again, similar question to ask Mr. Patel. Yes, I mean, there's nothing in the design and access statement to identify a positive design rationale for changing the scale in the site from the 2 stories on Oaklands Avenue up to 73 AOD in the site immediately next door, is there?
I think there's I think the context of the ambitious plan for the Great West Corridor master plan, the creation of jobs and homes on that corridor, is a statement of intent from GLA and London Borough Hounslow about change. Now, is change a negative thing? I think in some cases it can be positive. I think there's many positive aspects that this project brings, but it's change.
Yes, but in terms of a design rationale for changing scale, you can't claim any sense of transition here, can you, Mr. Adams, between a 2-storey scale of development in Oaklands going up to 17 stories immediately on that elevation, on that boundary to the site? Can you?
I think we talked about the transition, didn't we, of the 11 houses backing onto the rear of the properties in Oakland Drive. It's being in some way, providing that edge.
Yes, and there's nothing in the DAFs or even your evidence to explain how development at that scale, so 73 metres AOD, is sensitive to 2-storey residential development in Oaklands, is there?
Sensitive to? No.
Yeah. And you'd obliterate views of Gillette Tower from Oaklands, wouldn't you, with the development of that scale?
I think we've shown in the illustrations that for a number of key locations, the view of the tower would be maintained. I think with development will come changes in townscape, and.
But you said you've retained the views for people in the new development, but you've obliterated them for those on Oaklands Avenue, haven't you?
Well, yeah, I think it's we could start with a hierarchy of this, of where you would view it from. I think you can see very much how we'd set the building line frontage back on Cyan Lane to protect the views from the public, from the more primary street.
Yeah, well, I'm just asking about Oaklands Avenue. So, again, it's difficult to say that the scale of the buildings there on that elevation, Mr. Adams, is a positive response to locally distinctive scale in Oaklands Avenue. That's right, isn't it?
It's a change.
It's not a positive response to 2-storey development that's locally distinctive, is it?
I think if you don't say it's part, I think we need to judge what might be negative. Mr. Roberts will include in the roundtable discussion all the aspects that we've been through on sunlight, daylight, overshadowing, and various acts of privacy, which, in all of those aspects, we don't cause any detrimental effect to the existing properties in.
It's my final point, Mr. Adams. I'm not asking about other land use type implications. The relationship of scale by transforming a suburban setting into an urban one means that there is no positive response to local distinctiveness in 2-storey development in Oaklands Avenue. That's right, isn't it?
I think I started off by my interpretation and others' interpretation of what's contextual, and I think Oaklands Avenue is an area to the east of Cyan Lane, but predominantly what exists east of Cyan Lane are large commercial building footprints of a completely contrast to what exists to the west, and I think it's that I think is what's contextual about this, that actually as part of that area of very large buildings stemming from the 1930s, 1920s and 1930s and undergoing a transformation now as part of an opportunity area is part of that change.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Adams. Those are my questions, ma'am.
Thank you. So it's 11:10 now, time for a break. If we break until 30:30, and then we'll take questions from Ms. Striak and her team. Just to remind you that you're still on the stand and under cross-examination and the rules that go with that.
Okay, that's fine.
So we'll resume at 30:30. Thank you.
I can't.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Someone in the lobby. Okay. Okay, so over to you then, Mr. Jack, sorry. Yeah, Mr. Jack.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Mr. Adams, good morning. I can't hear you, Mr. Adams.
Sorry, I've done that again. I've started talking with the mute on. Good morning, Mr. Strode.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Adams. Could we have a look at your proof of evidence, please, on page 48? These clean air routes, and I don't know whether it's possible to put that slide up about the clean air route.
Page 48. Colleagues in the other room, any chance you could load page 48 up, please? Are you awake in the next room?
Yeah, we're just finding it now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. It was one of your early slides.
Proof of evidence or?
Yeah. Proof of evidence.
Yeah, page 48, Rebecca.
Page 48, 3.9 constraints. Okay. Yeah. So you've got these clean air routes marked there, and I'm particularly interested in the one that goes through the water garden and then further east, and it looks as if it goes down Harlequin Avenue. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Is that a plan, an idea, a proposal, a firm proposal?
Okay, these are, the clean air routes is a concept that was included in the Great West Corridor Master Plan. So these are routes essentially through the proposed opportunity area. The one particularly that you raised, Harlequin Avenue, is part of, I think, hopefully a future aspiration and connectivity to the Great West Road. So I think what's happened, I think as part of the iteration of this, some of those clean air routes, I think, on our proposal have slightly changed alignment. But I think it's overall this principle that as part of the Tesco site coming forward, that we create key pedestrian routes that link to these future clean air routes, or probably more sustainable routes to the Great West Corridor, potentially the new station, and so on. So these have emanated as part of that Great West Corridor Master Plan.
All right, but you haven't spoken to anybody. You haven't got any firm plans on how this is supposed to be implemented.
I think it's as part of, obviously elements of this are off our site really. So I think what we can do within is influence what we can do within the site. I'm not sure, and it's probably for Mr. Roberts to comment on the planning section of whether, as part of the commitments from this project coming forward, there are any other off-site contributions through SIL or other things. But I think it's probably best I leave that to Mr. Roberts' evidence.
So if maybe I can give some more information here. When the planning application was submitted for the Boulder Academy, we local residents were very concerned that the children who would be attending the Boulder Academy from Brentford would be having to walk a long way round, or if they were walking or cycling, that they would be coming along the Great West Road westwards, and they would then come up to Gillette Corner, come up Scion Lane, and either turn right at McFarlane Lane or walk through the Tesco car park to get to the Boulder Academy. And we were suggesting that a much better route would be for them to come along the Great West Road, up Harlequin Avenue, as you've got marked there, along the perimeter of the Sky site, through what you're proposing is the water garden to the Boulder Academy. And this was totally ruled out as impossible. And that was partly because of the drastically increased security at the Sky site following the Borough Road bombings. So this is why I'm asking the question. It would be wonderful to have this sort of route, but I think it's totally ruled out,
Okay.
unless you know otherwise.
Okay, I think that's Mr. Shrigak. I think that's why on our proposal, and I showed on the concept drawing, this idea of 4 entry points to the site in each of the 4 corners. And I would hope that some of these are longer term aspirations, but what can we deliver within the Tesco site is the opportunity that potentially school children could enter the site in what I describe as the southeast corner, head through the clearing, and then either through the water gardens or one of the lanes, then head up in a northwesterly direction to the Boulder Academy through public realm, which is safe and is overlooked and is well lit and it's hopefully got good air quality. So I think in part in looking at how we connect to those local facilities, I hope at least within the site that's within the immediate control, which is this Tesco site, we can deliver some of those aspirations. And I think the wider ambitions probably fall part of that great ambition of the corridor opportunity area.
And have you had any discussions with Sky about this?
I think there's been dialogue with Sky, but I'm not aware particularly on that route to Harlequin Avenue, no. And
the other clean air route there, which goes along the back of the northern side of the Gillette building, how would that one work? Because I can't even see how that one would get to the Great West Road. I think that's all.
As I said, I think some of these are extracts from that plan, of which at the time when we were doing this as we started at the end of 2019, were routes that we took from that proposal. But I agree with you. In some of these instances, that aspiration might be an ambitious one. I can't comment. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I think I would suggest, I don't think we can rely on the Great West Corridor plan to deliver all of this. I would think that you would need to be having discussions with Sky and with whoever now owns the Gillette site to make sure that this could all happen. Otherwise, everything is going to be bunched onto Scion Lane, with obviously lots more pedestrian, cyclists and traffic. And I know that we're in disagreement about that, but that will be covered during the roundtable discussions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Can we turn to page 128, where we're looking at the distances between the buildings? Oh, is it possible to make that any bigger? Right. So, am I correct in saying that the minimum distance between the buildings should be 18 metres?
Each side of public realm, which you can see the area in white, the east-west routes, the lanes are 18 metres. The one running north-south is 20.
Sorry, my question was, is it correct that the minimum should be 18 metres?
Oh, should be. We've indicated 18 metres, 17 metres, as you can see on this plan, as the minimum dimension across internal courtyards.
Yeah, no, I'm asking whether there is a policy or a guideline that suggests that distances between buildings shouldn't be less than 18 metres.
I don't think there's anything specifically in Hounslow's policy which refers to 18 metres. If we go back historically, there may have been an older policy in the Mayor's Housing SPG which referred to a yardstick, but it also came with the caveat that it shouldn't be applied rigidly and unnecessarily restrict density. Our view is the 17 metres is appropriate.
So how many places are there here where the distance is, you've put minimum 18 metres, so if we can stick to the 18 metres,
yeah.
How many locations is the distance actually less than 18 metres?
For townscape reasons, there are a number of, on a number of instances, we felt it was appropriate to perhaps think of how we might get enclosure between the buildings as helping define spaces, and it's actually not indicated on this drawing. You can see in the southeast corner between blocks B and C, in the northeast corner between building A and building B, in the northwest corner between building F and building A, where where particular instances we don't get overlooking, it's where corners join. We've got slightly tighter dimensions which are set out on this drawing.
So would you agree with me, I'm just looking at this again, would you agree with me that there are 4 locations where the distance is below 18 metres?
That's correct. 4 specified areas on the plan.
Right.
Yes.
So if we look at buildings, I'm starting from the southeast corner. So between building B and C,
yes,
you've got a distance of 12 metres. What's the height of building B and what's the height of building C?
The height of building B is 64.1 AOD.
Sorry, could you say in terms of number of stories, please?
That's what the maximum parameters set out is actually the height of buildings relative to the AOD is actually on the parameter plan. So it's so we've got a series of heights on drawing. In reference core document CD 4.2 gives a series of heights relative to AOD, which is the maximum parameter.
So maybe I can help you there. So I understand that the height of building B is between 10 and 14 stories.
Sorry, say that again. Between.
I understand that building B is between 10 and 14 stories. Yes. And building C is between 2 and 9 stories.
Yes.
So the distance there of 12 metres, I mean, for those people who are on the ground floor, it's quite a short distance, wouldn't you agree?
The ground floor is defined by a double height 2-storey colonnade. Which defines the mixed uses at those lower levels, and you can see actually that the relationship in the way that those buildings touch, is actually the 2 corners of the buildings are touched. It's a south east facing space where they touch. I think we're creating a degree of, in townscapes terms, what I would say is sort of, between what we've created an arrival space on Grant Way and Scion Lane. It defines moving from one space, that arrival space, into a different space, which is the clearing. So I don't believe it won't have a negative effect on living conditions. This is a piece of townscape and a piece of design.
Could we have a look in that case between buildings J and F? So these are the townhouses on McFarlane Lane, J. Yes. And you've got building F, and you've got a distance there of 11 metres.
Yes.
Which is, wouldn't you agree that that is considerably less than 18 metres?
That's the maximum parameter. That's the extent of the maximum parameters on the plan, and a minimum of 11 metres, as you say.
And the height of building F?
It's 43.2 to 58.9 AOD.
Yeah. So between 5 and 10 stories.
Yeah.
And this is, I mean, we'll be looking at daylight, sunlight and overshadowing probably during we will be looking at it during the roundtable discussions. But 11 metres is a very short distance there, wouldn't you agree?
No, I think it provides I think all of these buildings have got to come forward as a reserve matters application, of which detailed aspects can be looked in further detail. For us, as I set out my proof of evidence at the introduction, is about McFarlane Lane being transformed from a route that's not overlooked and is essentially a route which is between 2 palisade fences into a street, and sometimes streets go through narrow sections, and sometimes they widen out. So that particular 11-metre reference, is between the southern end of building F and the midpoint of the terrace of J. And then, as you see on the plan, the central section of building F steps back where the existing oak tree is. I think it's quite a nice feature on the street, and we've set back from the root protection zone in the central area of that building before it then gets slightly closer to the northern end of F before you move into the MOL. So I think streetscape and townscape design is about variety, things going in and out and so on.
And what would be the distance between the the last house in J in those terraced townhouses? So the one furthest along McFarlane Lane, the most northeasterly one, and Block F, because it's not marked on there.
No, it isn't. We didn't obviously specify every dimension, but it's in excess of 11 metres. And from my eye, I'd probably say that it's, without trying to, it's probably in the region of 16 metres, I would have thought.
So you'd agree that that's below the minimum suggested of 18 metres?
Sorry, Mr. Striak, I said before, I don't understand where you have got the minimum from 18 metres from, please. If you could reference me to that, please.
Okay, well, we'll have a look at that and come back to that one later. Can we have a look at the sort of the garden areas, so the water garden, the meander, and the clearing? Now, on that on this particular diagram, it says that the water garden is 31 metres.
Yes.
And if we look at, no, I'm just trying to find, and on page, just a second, we go back to page 48
of my proof
of your no, yes, if you go back to page 48 of your proof, it says it's 40 metres. Which one is it?
Sorry, page
48, so the clean route map that we were looking at.
Yeah, that's the existing dimension. On page 48 is the dimension across the existing space between the fence to Sky and the rear boundary of the Tesco store. The dimension which you've referred to as a minimum of 31 on the parameter plan drawing is the minimum dimension between essentially the red line boundary, which is the fence again, and the tightest distance across the water gardens to the balcony zone of the parameter plan. So as you can see on building A, actually the building steps further away from the boundary the more you move westwards. So I think the dimension of 40 metres is taken pretty much roughly halfway across the space, which I would imagine equates to the dimension between the central section of building A and the boundary. So they probably look consistent. From memory, I think we follow that existing line of the water gardens in that central location. So one's an existing and one's a proposed, Mr. Striak, is the simple answer to the question.
Right, so do I assume then that building A will be further north and more into the water garden than the current Tesco store? The back wall of the Tesco store? No, because
it's the boundary at the back of the Tesco store onto the water garden, which is the line we defined. And actually, you'll notice on the parameters, the block parameters, the water garden actually gets wider. It actually gets wider as it moves further westwards. So that 31 is a minimum dimension to actually the balcony zone on that maximum parameter.
Okay, so I think it would have been useful to have the dimensions at either end there, so that we could be clear what it actually is, because we haven't got consistency across these two diagrams.
Okay.
All right. If I can please take you to the second design review panel report from the 28th of January 2021, which is CD 4.11.
Yes.
Right, and if we have a look at, yeah, it's a shame that the pages weren't numbered and the paragraphs weren't numbered, but if we have a look in the middle of page 2, Heart of Osterley.
Yes.
We've got that. So halfway down it says, if I can read it, the open spaces are too small for the scale of the scheme, and the size of both the meander and the clearing feel minor in comparison to the height and bulk of buildings. Although the design of the meander has improved significantly, its triangular form suggests it might be difficult to inhabit when you consider the amount of people that will use it. We are concerned it will become a passing through place and not somewhere for people to pause and dwell. For a scheme that will contain approximately 3,500 people, there is a real need for a more substantial open space at the physical centre of the development. If the built form was reduced, there would be space to carve out a true Heart of Osterley in the centre of the site. So, did you alter the design as a result of this to reduce the built form?
We didn't, and I think we've...
Sorry, you didn't, you said?
No, we didn't, and I think that as I said in the response to Mr. Linus, you know, we take the DRP comments in a round with the balance of other views, and actually we don't agree. I think first of all, we believe that the idea of 2 spaces is better than 1, and that's I think actually 3 spaces rather than 1, to be honest. And my view is that the clearing isn't too small. I think in this country, we generally create public spaces that quite often are too big, and actually activity becomes too dispersed. And I think the ambition for the clearing, which is a route between the Sky Campus, Scion Lane, and ultimately to the Great West Road, is a place that's, I said in my introduction, a local place, a local heart, a focal point. And for those spaces to exist, I believe there needs to be a degree of enclosure. So we have to take on different advice at different points, and we didn't agree that the clearing was too small.
My summary of what the design review panel said there would be that what they're saying is that there isn't enough open space around the development, and in order to have more open space, the development needs to be reduced in size. Would you agree with my summary?
That's their statement from their letter, yes.
Was there anything in the design review panel recommendations that resulted in any change in any of this development?
Yes, there was, and I think that's set out in my proof of evidence in the pages that we referred to with Mr. Linus before. We set out quite a detailed list of responses to DRP1, and as Mr. Linus read out, the design review panel actually commended us on the changes that we had made to some changes that we'd made to the scheme.
Sorry, I'm referring to DRP2, not to DRP1.
DRP2 arrived after the submission of the planning application, the feedback to that. As a result of that, we made some changes to the design code, most specifically around the relationship of the buildings on McFarlane Lane, and included additional information on those homes.
Did you reduce the size or the quantum?
No, we didn't.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, because I think we might have an additional question about the clearing. So my colleague here would like to ask it. Sorry, I'm just going to turn my laptop around. Okay.
Thank you. My name's Sheila O'Reilly. I'm also a member of Osterley and White Green Residents Association. One of the issues we were concerned about was Hounslows local plan policy SC5 seeks suitable publicly accessible open space for new developments, but your supplementary statements on round table matters, paragraph 2.28, I mean, apologies if you're going to deal with this later, doesn't say how much space is available on the Tesco site, and it's going to be dealt with under reserve matters. But the water gardens are proposed to be publicly accessible and use a walking and cycling route towards the Great West Road, as well as passive recreation. There'll be about 1,200 students at the Boulder Academy in the next couple of years once it's finally full, and this would make a good walking route towards the buses on the Great West Road. And the Nishcam school pupils, with about 1,600 approximately, are more likely to use Scion Lane, so it's probably a good idea to keep them separate. But with 1,677 new homes at the Tesco site, that will mean 3,500, 4,000 more people. And as Barbara said, the dimensions of the water garden are given as either 30 or 40 metres by 200. But about half of that is going to be underwater, as it's boggy now anyway. We'd like an assurance that those numbers of people won't create dangerous conditions in such a limited space, and that there'll be an undertaking for 24/7 management of the open space, particularly here in the water gardens.
Okay, right. Thank you, Sarai, for the question. I think that I think the idea of the open space within this project, which combination of streets and spaces make up just under about over 45% of the site. We see a variety of spaces, some quieter, some busier, some for younger people, some for older people. I think it's that variety that we seek, and that the play isn't just about designating areas, but integrated within the landscape, and that also includes biodiversity and water, which you rightly say is the water garden. So I think we've set out an ambition. The development specification and the parameter plan set out areas of open space, which I think we will deal with in the round table matters also in the relationship to policy, and Mr. Roberts is proof. But I think we're looking to create, and hopefully from the images I showed, spaces of high quality. On the management issue, very similar projects of this nature for our client St Edward. I think they, again, Mr. Roberts can probably embellish this response, but would have a management company that through gardening and other maintenance kept up the areas to a high quality, in terms of street maintenance and landscape management and so on. And ultimately, back to issues of safety, I think each of the phases that come forward will be subject to reserve matters application, which we could look at perhaps particular concerns on each stage. And we have done other projects where we have similar water gardens and similar areas of water attenuation that are not fenced and are attractive and are still safe. So I think there's partly an element of policy, and we'll talk about that. I think a design of a variety, and then perhaps we can pick up some of the more detailed issues in the round table discussion, if that's okay.
But can you tell me if your other development proposals elsewhere would contain quite so many people? We're looking at 5,000 or 6,000 potentially every day. Yeah. It's almost like being in a tube train corridor.
I think this is providing much needed housing, including affordable housing. We think it's housing of the highest quality in an environment that's well designed. I think we can, again, in the round table discussion, look at all the indicators of quality in terms of natural daylight, of sunlight and daylight into public spaces, of ADF factor, which is the sunlight into rooms. The aspect in where we have, I talked earlier in my presentation about the combination of dual aspect and single aspect, and where we have single aspect, they have good aspect over public realm, over podium gardens and so on. We're looking to create homes. Yes, they're different than the two-story houses that make up the neighbourhoods around to the west of the site in Osterley, but just because it's there are examples of intensification of optimization of this brownfield site to provide much needed homes, and not at the detriment of quality. Ms. Striak, you've gone onto mute.
Sorry, I don't know how that happened. Okay, sorry. So I've got some additional questions on the design review panel, please. Again, report 2, which I think you've got in front of you. So if we go to page 3, under sustainability and livability. Sorry. Hold on, I'm just finding my place. Yeah, so it says the second sentence. However, it is clear the parameter plans would result in development that features double-banked buildings with long corridors, inevitably resulting in a higher proportion of single-aspect dwellings than is desirable. Within the context of the pandemic, with families confined to flats with limited outlooks and risk of overheating, we feel that it is unacceptable to have this many single-aspect dwellings. We would urge you to look again at your master plan and consider if smaller forms of buildings that are not connected are more appropriate. So you're obviously aware of this, of the concern of the Hounslow Design Review Panel about the high number of single aspect units. Yes?
Between the design review panel, yes.
Did you modify the design to reduce the number of single aspect units?
We have worked to as I said in my presentation, to as part of this, we set out our development specification would have 50% as a minimum. Our illustrative scheme would have illustrates 55%. I think it's worth bearing in mind at the time that the application was submitted, we had support from both the GLA endorsing the number of single aspect or dual aspect apartments was satisfactory. It is fair to say that in the 18 months, 2 years since the application was submitted, the environment has changed, and there are moves to increase the number of dual aspect homes. We have reserved matters applications potentially to do that, and I show in my proof pages 124 and 125 of how we could potentially increase that coming forward. So I think we were at a position that was deemed acceptable by the GLA and London Borough of Hounslow at the time the submission, the application was submitted and considered. Things have changed, but we have got within the flexibility of future reserve matters coming forward to improve on that, as I set out in my proof.
Mr. Adams, the planning applications were submitted towards the end of September 2020, which was 6 months after the start of the pandemic.
Yes.
So did you not look at increasing the number of dual aspect homes in that period?
We did. We in our illustrative scheme, we worked hard. You'll be more than aware that we have no north-facing single aspect apartments in the scheme, and we worked hard to do that. And as I said in my proof of evidence on pages 124, 125, we show how we could potentially in the future amend our illustrative scheme to increase the number of dual aspect homes. Okay.
Thank you. And to what percentage would you propose to increase the number of dual aspect homes from the, I think you said 50, is it 55% at the moment?
50% in the development specification, 55% in the illustrative scheme.
Right. So what would you propose to increase that to?
I can't hypothesize, but I can't predict what we would come to at a future. Policy is changing, and ultimately we're striking to strike a balance between optimisation and our quality that I've talked about before. So I can't answer that question, Mrs. Striak, I'm sorry.
But would you bear in mind the fact that the Hounslow Design Review Panel says that it is unacceptable to have this many single aspect dwellings?
Where's that written, please?
That is in. It is clear that
page 3.
Yes, in what I've just read there.
Okay. Okay.
In the middle of that section.
Okay.
Would you agree with that?
It's a statement that the design review panel have made.
Yeah, and would you accept that this is something that you will take serious note of when you are looking at how you propose to take these plans forward?
I think I've said that. Mrs. Stewart, yes.
Right. Now, you also said in your presentation earlier that 55% are dual aspect, and you said, if I recall correctly, that this was rising to about 70% on the higher levels. Does that mean then that it's much lower than 55% on the lower levels?
I think we set out all this in our proof of evidence, where, you know, as you imagine, at lower levels there's less, and as the building goes up we get more dual aspect. Yes, absolutely.
So that means there will be more single aspect on the lower levels?
Potentially, yes, potentially.
So why is that? Why would there be?
Because buildings, as the building steps up, floors step back, you know, and building footprints mean that more apartments get dual aspect as you step up the building. I think in all of this, we've shown an illustrative scheme, and each reserve matters application will come forward, as I've said before.
I'm sure we'll be looking at daylight, sunlight and overshadowing during the roundtable matters. I'm concerned about single aspect units and the amount of daylight and sunlight that they get on the lower levels in that case, particularly when we've got tall buildings and not very much space between them.
Okay, well, I think we'll cover that. I think again in my evidence that the overall ADF factors we take is very good for this scheme. We tested 33 public spaces, of which 31 achieved more than 50% sunlight on the 21st of March for 2 hours. You know, some of the indicators, I suppose, of residential quality we've performed very well with.
We'll have a look at that, I'm sure, during the roundtable discussions. Can I move on to the second paragraph under sustainability and livability, where it says, and again I'm quoting, we are concerned that sustainability is not a clear driver for the scheme. Although there have been improvements to the carbon reduction targets, which we understand will improve as the grid decarbonises, we are convinced that the aspirations should be higher from the outset and include commitments to reduce embodied as well as operational energy and minimise payment into the carbon offset fund. The proposed energy centre indicated does not seem sufficient in size for a scheme that is serious about sustainability, and we urge Hounslow to set the bar high in terms for more strategic development schemes like this one. You're aware of this comment, and I'm wondering how you've responded to this comment.
I think we would all endorse and agree with the ambition to reduce carbon, and both in operational and in embodied carbon in construction. I think in the nature of the applications, I think this should be judged in two ways. We're an outline application, which is part of a series of two linked applications that enables the Tesco store to be rebuilt on the Homebase site for a number of years of construction, to allow that store to be then operational prior to the Tesco store on this site ultimately being closed and the site redeveloped. That's a number of years ahead, and I think we're all aware how fast and how imperative dealing with issues of carbon reduction are. You know, the application and the nature of this requires a proposal to be put forward, which has been done, and it sets out carbon ambitions. We could be looking at situations where actually reserve matters applications are not coming forward for a couple of years or so. And I think we know how the environment is changing, 2020-25 and the future home standard, the move to zero carbon at 2030, and actually our own client at St Edward's ambition for net zero carbon by 2030. So things are moving very fast, and actually I think even again, you know, in the last 18 months, we've seen changes in GLA policy, from centralised heating systems to mechanical heat recovery and air source heat pumps. The world is changing very fast, and I think what we should be doing is really judging this at the time that we're coming forward. Now, in planning terms, it can be difficult to do that, and I'll let Mr. Roberts in the round table refer to that. But I certainly don't think that sustainability is an imperative driver for this project and all projects that we're looking at.
And can I ask then, look, going forward, what your view is about this suggestion of paying into the carbon offset fund? And I think Mr. Firkins referred to this on Tuesday during his statement.
It's not my area of special expertise, Mr. Striak, and I think let's pick that up in the roundtable discussion with people that the relevance of that off-site fund.
Okay, all right, thank you. There's one other comment I wanted to make, and I don't know what page it's on in the in your proof of evidence, but there's a photograph of the Adini building. Let me just check which page that was on. I think it's on page 43. Yes, page 43.
Yes.
And I'm just looking to see if there is a reference there. Hold on, this is 891. I think it's 3.6.15. I don't know if you're aware of the fact that this is not the building that was approved.
Right, okay.
And I think you need to have a look at that, because this is not the design that was approved. I think somebody
maybe we could check that, but okay. I think we need to just double check. Obviously, there's a reference here to a particular application which this reflects. I talked about at the bottom of the appeal. I'm sorry, Mr. I can refer this to Mr. Roberts in the roundtable on the planning. If there's an inaccuracy, I apologise. We thought for the best of intentions that this was correct, but we can check that.
There was a last minute change to that, and that needs to be corrected.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
What was the change?
The Art Deco frontage was maintained in the building as a result of our discussions with the Dini. So it does look very different to that building there.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I don't know. Have we got any further questions? Okay. So my colleague here, Mrs. Szokalska, has got some further questions.
Okay, my name is Olga Szokalska.
Just a moment. Let me mute my laptop.
My name is Olga Szokalska, resident of Northumberland Avenue.
You're very faint.
I've got.
Yes, I can't hear at all, actually.
Assessment.
We can't hear you.
And in many of your replies,
No.
Adam,
Can you turn the sound up on your?
Just one other opinion.
Can you turn the sound up? We can't hear you.
Isn't it a matter of policy, London plan?
No.
And
Mr.
policy
Pelster,
before
we can't hear you.
to document. London policy default delivering good design.
Okay, Mr. Striak, are you still there?
6.227.
I need to stop you.
Where it says it
show
how they have considered and addressed the design review recommendations.
Ms. Striak, are you still there?
I understand it. This is a policy requirement.
Ma'am, I don't know whether.
Address.
Oh, well. So.
Show how you've considered and addressed.
We can't hear you.
The design review recommendations.
Sorry, Miss Striak, can you hear me?
Well,
Miss Striak, are you there?
Excuse me, can you hear?
Is Miss Striak there?
excuse me, was I on silent? Oh, because. Okay. I think I was on silent. Sorry, I don't. Yeah, I'll do it again. I do it again. Sorry, I don't think. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'm sorry about this. Okay, so I will repeat my question. Because in our we've been referring a lot to Hounslow review panel a lot. So I understand that this is a matter of policy. So London Plan Policy D4, delivering good design. So this is document CD 6.227, which says that schemes show how they have considered and addressed the design review recommendations. Can you hear?
What's your question? This is policy D4 you're referring to,
Yes.
is it? Yes.
Yes, policy D4.
So what's your question?
Well, the policy says that the scheme show how they have considered and addressed the design review recommendations. So I understand that this is policy requirement to address the recommendations of design review panel.
So what's the what?
Now, Mr. Adams, in his reply, implied that it was just the assessment of review panel is just one of the opinions that, I mean, obviously he said that they did not address the number of issues raised by Hounslow review panel. And I'm saying this is a matter of policy for the scheme to address, consider and address. So why wasn't it done?
Okay. I think I've answered that question to Mrs. Striak, which is our page in our proof sets out elements of the design that were adjusted and indeed commended by the design panel that we took on board, and there were other areas, excuse me, that we didn't. And I think as I said, we have to take comments across a broad spectrum of stakeholders and issues, a complex series of layers. And I said a number of times at the time of submission and ultimately of approval, we had a committee resolution to approve. We had endorsement from both the GLA and London Borough of Hounslow to our proposed scheme. We didn't think it was appropriate to make those changes.
Except that in the number of your summaries, you did not reflect, the views of the independent design review panel.
Okay, is that a statement or a question? Sorry.
It's a statement.
Okay. So I tried to explain yesterday, this is an opportunity for you to ask questions on the evidence of the witnesses that are being brought forward. For you to be saying what you want to say will be a chance when you give your evidence.
Okay, so the question, I guess, again, was why the concerns of review panel were not addressed when it is a policy requirement.
Okay, I think I've answered that question already.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Striak, have you got any further questions for this witness? Mr. Striak? Maybe she's coming. Yes. There we go.
Yeah, about that. We seem to be having some technical issues from one computer to another. So sorry.
That's all right. Do you have any further questions?
No, that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I have no questions either to add. So back to you, Mr. Warren, for any questions in re-examination.
Thank you, ma'am. I don't have very many at all, but just a handful of references, really, Mr. Adams. Could I just take you back to the questions you were asked by Mr. Linus and remind you, first of all, of what you were asked. You were taken to the Historic England response. I think actually in the first instance you referred to it, but then you were taken to it later on. So I think that's core document 12.2. Do you mind just unearthing that again somewhere? Tell me when you're there. There's no rush. No, don't worry. I had to go through a kind of electronic ticket as well. You with me? This was the letter that we're all grumbling about not being paginated. Paragraph number 28th of May 2020. You with me?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, and you were asked about the extent to which various things had been identified as being of concern. Do you remember? And you remember reference being made to Osterley Park and Sion as well here. If one looks at the summary on the first page under the subheading summary. Yes. Can you hear me? Okay, am I breaking up?
No, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay. We see, don't we, reference to significant concerns regarding the potential impact on the setting of the registered landscapes at Osterley Park and Sion Park, and recommendation of further analysis of significance in order to better understand the impact of the development and inform design revisions to avoid or minimise harm. Do you see that? And I just wanted to see specifically within the letter what it was about Sion. Osterley, we've got, it's rather clearer, but if one looks at what they're saying, Historic England was saying about Sion at the time, do you remember you were asked, if you go down a couple of pages, I think it's Mr. Linus's 3 from the back, do you remember Historic England's position? Halfway through.
Is this the reference to view 14?
Yeah, so there's a subheading Historic England's position, do you see?
Yes.
And it says, like the proposals for the Homebase site, the proposed development will be visible from Sion Park. View 14 in particular suggests a harmful impact. Yeah. I just wanted to understand, I don't know whether you can confirm, view 14, when you took us to your page, I think it was 70, where are we? Was it 76 of your proof, and you showed us that before and after?
Yes. Yes.
So that's page 76 of the proof. You on the right-hand side, sorry, we have to have both of these things open at the same time, man, to make sense of this. Forgive me. You've got 2 images, haven't you? Initial wireline proposals and revised wireline showing Gillette Building clock face.
That's right.
See that?
Yes.
Just are you able to confirm whether that is a part of view 14?
It is, yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay. I think it goes by another name in the latest AVR material, ma'am. So we need to be absolutely clear about that. So that's the view in particular that Historic England were referring to in that paragraph in their letter, and they refer to the extent in that same paragraph, the extent of visibility and harm is likely to be restricted to the western parkland in this instance. I think in this instance they mean by distinction from the home-based development. But anyway, that's what they're saying about your scheme. Is that right? And is this a view from, quotes, the Western Parkland, view 14?
It's a view from the Western Parkland, but not the most extreme Western area. No.
Not the most extreme one. No,
Yeah.
I'm with you. You were asked, I think, right at the outset about the extent to which your design and access statement, remember that section, took into account or identified constraints in relation to Sion, Park and Q. Remember you were asked about section 2.2 of the design and access statement, no reference to Q or the Thames path, and you said no, there isn't any. Remember that?
Yeah, I do.
I mean, in relation to what Historic England were telling you about Kew World Heritage Site, or indeed the Thames Path, what did they tell you in this letter?
They said it is not likely to impact the Kew World Heritage Site, owing to the site being a greater distance away. They were quite explicit in that, in both in this letter and in the meeting itself.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So just go back, would you, finally on this point to your page 76 in your proof, the one that we just looked at for the bits of view 14 that you explained earlier, with the subject of an adjustment to the design which you're illustrating there. And I mean, you covered this page partly in the questions and answers of Mr. Linus, and you were asked about 4.13.5 and 4.13.7.
Yeah.
But if one looks at 4.13.6, do you see, as a result of the ongoing design development process and our dialogue with HE and Hounslow, height and massing was repositioned to reduce the impact of the Tesco development on views from the Sion RPG shown on views. And those are, so in terms of, as it were, facts and rather than opinions, what were the facts about the extent to which the design was revised in this way following dialogue with HE? I
think you can see very clearly on the before and after Y lines how effectively the massing was moved, and the two diagrams above it explain how the massing was reduced on the eastern side of the site, and while still providing legibility to the clearing, was moved effectively further to the west. So on the before and after, you can see how the bulk has moved from right to left across the image, with a greater mass being set behind the existing trees, and therefore reducing the impact. And also you can see the thing which I answered to Mr. Linus in the questions, which was the relationship to the top of the Gillette Tower. Yes,
I'm with you. The other question I wanted to ask you was just, you were asked a couple of points about policy towards the end, remember, of your questions from Mr. Linus, and in particular there was that emerging policy relating to the site in the emerging Hounslow plan, and you were taken in that respect. You needn't turn it up. Page 92 of the design and access statement, where there's some policy references. That was the context, remember? And again, the point was put to you that there wasn't any reference there to how proposals sat with or aligned with that policy in terms of height. Do you remember?
That's right.
You accepted that what you did and didn't show, as it were, in that or describe in the section on policy. But I just want to ask about the context of that that surrounds that particular point. You've described in the evidence the discussions all the way through the process with London Borough of Hounslow officers, and I just want to get a sense from you, if possible, about, because we're dealing here with an emerging policy, aren't we? GWC 5. How were the officers, when you discussed height in particular with them, proposed height in particular, treating indicative heights within the master plan and within the emerging policy? I mean, what was their approach? Because obviously you were showing them images of buildings which were higher.
Yeah, I think they were, as I've said in response to other questions, they were comfortable that with the heights of these buildings in relationship to that policy. emerging policy.
All right. Okay, I think that's it, Mr. Adams. I'm very grateful. Thank you very much indeed, ma'am. That's all.
Thank you.
Mr.
Okay. So that was what we had on the programme today. We did moot yesterday the possibility of having Mr. Spence give evidence in chief today, and I think people took the view that you would prefer to keep it all together. Is that still your view? It's just a large chunk of inquiry time to lose if we don't.
It is. It's a shame, man. But I think we did explore this yesterday because we anticipated we might be a bit short today. And I think, I don't know whether it was Miss Strike herself or one of her team, but we communicated. My instructing solicitors communicated with Ogra yesterday and asked whether Mr. Spence was available, but I don't think he is. I know Miss Strike can confirm it. So there's a more fundamental point about whether he can appear at all.
Sorry. What was that?
Whether he can appear at all today, rather than whether it was.
No, sorry.
Yes, I thought you meant whether he could appear at all. Okay.
No, he can't. No, he's not available today.
Okay, well that sorts that. So short day today, possibly a longer day tomorrow, even though it's Friday. Okay, so we'll adjourn for the day now. For the council's note for the website for tomorrow, then we're expecting to hear from Mr. Spence for Ogra in Chief and cross-examination, and possibly Mr. Forbes-led on trees as well, depending on how we do time-wise with Mr. Spence.
Yes, I've got one. I beg your pardon, Mr. Linus. You go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, ma'am, I think it obviously follows from what you said, but I can obviously stand down Mr. Stroud. There's no possibility of him getting on tomorrow. I know it had been possibly thought of earlier, but thanks for confirming that.
Okay.
I had one admin point, ma'am. Forgive me before we break today. I just want to come back. Do you remember there was a point in Mr. Patel's evidence where he was being asked about landmarks and to the extent to which they were dominating and so on, and he made reference to examples, and I think there was an exchange with Mr. Linus about whether any examples could be provided. Mr. Patel said, "Can I come back to you?" I think he said, "Can I come back to you after the break?" About that, as well as a number of other things. We've got Mr. Patel has gone away and found an image of a landmark which which illustrates the point that he was making. I'm entirely in your hands, ma'am. I'm not insisting that we put it in, but it was a trailing end from yesterday. That was one of the points that he said he'd have to come back on if you and Mr. Linus wanted, an actual example of the point.
Can I suggest you give Mr. Linus sight of it before anything's accepted up? I would want to avoid having to recall witnesses, for instance, if it raised further questions, or whether it added anything or not. Can I leave that between you and come back to me tomorrow?
By all means, ma'am. Yeah, I will do that. We'll send the photograph across and have an exchange.
You've frozen again, Mr. Linus.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Warren's frozen with me as well.
Oh no, you're back.
No, that's understood, ma'am. Happy to deal with it that way.
Okay. If there's nothing else, then until 9:30 tomorrow.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Thank you.